What makes the Singapore Sling more than just a cocktail? So join Renjie and me as we uncover its origin, unique flavors, and the best spots in Singapore to enjoy this iconic drink.
So Renjie, Singapore Sling. We've seen it in documentaries,
Yes.
we have seen it in videos, everything. How do we start this episode?
But what you end up with is essentially what in my mind is almost like a Southeast Asian tiki drink. It's like a tropical drink. It's pink in color. It's served in a tall glass, in a very distinctive glass, with a lot of ice. And it's called the Singapore Sling, so I guess by default, it's our national drink.
So what's the history behind it?
The history behind it is that it's invented in the Long Bar. Now, the Long Bar is, I guess, the bar on record at the Raffles Hotel, which is also a beautiful, beautiful hotel, the Grand Old Dame in Singapore. And it was, legend has it, invented by a bartender who is of Hainanese descent. I'm not going to pretend to remember his name, but we'll put it somewhere in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll put it in the video.
And why it was invented that way, specifically as a Singapore Sling, is because back in the olden times, I'm talking about like turn of the century, I guess like late 1800s, early 1900s, it was not a common thing for women to drink, right? And so like every good bartender, he sees a market gap. He sees a niche that he can fill. And so he's created essentially a drink that looks like fruit juice. Honestly, if you've seen a picture of a Singapore Sling, it could be guava juice in there, right? It looks exactly the same, but it contains a stealthy kick of booze. It's like a ninja drink, if you think about it.
So let me put you in the spot. What's your take on it? Do you like it? Do you hate it?
Okay. What I think of a Singapore Sling is that I think it's got a great history behind it. I think a lot of people go to the Long Bar to have a Singapore Sling because they're like, oh, I'm in Singapore, I must have the national drink, and I must go to the Long Bar.
Yeah.
The Long Bar is a gorgeous place. The way they've done it up, just being in Raffles Hotel, which is, again,
A lot of history. Yeah.
A lot of history. It's a glorious place to be in, to spend an evening. I will say that if you want to order a Singapore Sling, there are many other bars in Singapore that do really fascinating takes on like their own version of a Singapore Sling, right? And we know that Singapore is, you know, kind of the cocktail capital of Southeast Asia, I would say, and of Asia. And so a lot of these other versions maybe tone down the sweetness a little bit, adjust the ratios of, I don't know, maybe grenadine, question mark, but balance it in a way that is kind of very contemporary. So I would say that I would, if I were to have a Singapore Sling, I would go and order it at one of these new sort of award-winning places.
Awesome. Now, Singapore Sling is one drink that is, let's say, Singapore's national drink, as many call it, right? But what are other drinks that are still truly Singaporean and what our viewers or listeners should really try?
You know what I love is that if you look at the cocktail scene in Singapore right now, and again, one of the most vibrant, you know, has the most number of institutions on the Asia's 50 best cocktails list, for example, a lot of these new bars focus and draw very much on Singaporean heritage. And by that, I mean, whether it's in terms of cultural identity or even simple things like the herbs and the ingredients that you find that we use in our traditional cooking, in our traditional drinks, brews, stuff that we've grown up with. And so there are a lot of really fascinating bars out there in Singapore that look at their own heritage and create concoctions. And a place that I love and that I always bring guests to is this place called the Elephant Room. It's in the middle of sort of the nightlife district in Singapore, but it's run by a guy named Yugi, and he's a Tamil Singaporean. And he draws on a lot of sort of his Tamil heritage to make drinks. So for instance, one of the drinks that I love there, I always order it, is the Champa Fizz. So it's made with Champa, which is of course very like, you know, for the puja, you know, use it, but it's all super fragrant. And he infuses that together with fermented apple, he infuses that with honey and Woodford Reserve, which is obviously the sort of round, rich, sort of, you know, smoky kind of flavors, almost toasty flavors. It's a delightful drink and just so, in my mind, intrinsic to the Singaporean Tamil kind of flavors. And he also does some crazy other drinks. He has a drink that's made with like a flower crab rasam. So he distills the flower crab, I guess, and the rasam spices together to get essentially a clear liquid that doesn't have any of the saltiness or doesn't have any of the color, but it smells and tastes exactly like a flower crab rasam, if that makes sense. But he makes
But
it
still a
essentially-
good drink.
Still a delicious drink. And I think that's what's remarkable is places that can do ludicrous concepts on paper, but translate them in the cup to something that you'll ask for a second for.
And you think bars in Singapore do a good job at that?
Yeah, I think the amazing thing about bars for me in Singapore is that from a technique point of view, they are drawing on a lot of sort of the techniques that are not usually used in a bar, but maybe more found in a common kitchen or, whether it's in a traditional kitchen or in a fine dining kind of a Michelin type of kitchen, and then transposing that into the world of drinks. And I think the other wonderful part, again, is this concept-driven approach, right?
Yeah.
And I think Singapore stands in many ways unique in the density of these types of concepts. So whether it's a bar that's inspired by Little India in Singapore and the the mixologist Tamil heritage, you also have bars that are pocket bars where there aren't more than, let's say, 10 seats in the bar, right? You
that's
also
pretty
have
cool.
bars, it's amazing. You also have bars that look purely at native ingredients, at foraged ingredients from what grows around the bar. And I think all of these places, to me, makes up what makes Singapore just so amazing to discover, I think.
Yeah, that's quite awesome. So for the next episode, let's stick with liquids and move from the Singapore Sling and cocktails to soups.
Yes.
The soups of Singapore, because there are some super interesting soups.
Listen, I am the soup authority of the world, okay, because I'm so, soup is so fundamental to my identity that I have a very deep fundamental connection with soup. So I am very excited for this.
Well, I'm excited because we are going to graduate from the regular hot and sour and manchow soups to some super interesting ones.
Yes.
So let's find that out on the next episode.
Perfect.